If you're saying that my kids don't want to see me and you're keeping a family apart, you're going to be accountable to a higher authority. And she said, well, do you want to see your kids? And I said, of course I do. And I told her, at that time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was in office. He was the governor of California. I said, I've been to the governor's office. I've been to this, state representative. Why would I do all this if I didn't want to get my kids back? I've done everything that you guys have asked me to do. And so that happened, and she arranged visits to occur in the DCFS office. And I began to see my kids. Um, I didn't know the foster mother had passed away, and we had known the family already 11 years before the case. But they turned on me, and they were very critical of me, even though we were like family. They never were like that before the case, before we came to the attention of the courts. But once we got involved, they started saying a lot of negative things about me to the social worker. And so she passed away, and the kids began to see Dr. Swim. So when I found out they were in therapy, the way I found out they were in therapy is the social worker that was leaving the case, he was retiring. He said, um, they are seeing a therapist. Would you like to have therapy with your kids? And I said, yes, I'll have therapy. And I had some really bad experiences with the children's therapist because they were like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. Maybe you shouldn't see the kids. They were saying all these things when I was seeing them unmonitored outside of the office in the beginning. And they just kept getting more restrictive. And even after doing that, passing my classes, not just passing them, but participating, they still didn't, they found every excuse under the sun not to let me see them. And so I said, yeah, I'll see this therapist. So I gathered a bunch of pictures that I had, with in our lifetime, with the kids and I brought them to Dr. Swim, and I almost like laid it all out before her, and I said, I wanted to show her our life before this case, and show her the joy on the kids' faces, and how neat they look and groomed, together, put together they look. And the grooming as in like their personal hygiene, and their hair was neat and they were clean, and they had all these awards from school, and we had pictures of us hugging, and we're happy. And I wanted to like prove myself, because they had just painted me out to be this horrific person, and tried to claim that my kids were scared of me. And my daughter was longing to be with me the whole time. She never faltered from that. I want to go home with my mom. Never. But they were claiming, yeah, the kids don't want to go back. They don't want to return. And so eventually we began having these sessions with Dr. Swim, and Dr. Swim invited the foster parents, and she invited the social worker, and she did it very, very intentional. And when this all came together, there was little they could say, and the kids began to change their attitude towards me, the older ones, because it was already like in their head, like, mom is not good, something's wrong with her. um you know they just put so much stuff in the kids' head about me. uh they turned against me, the kids turned against me. And once we started seeing Dr. Swim and her team, they began to change their attitude. Like, they were completely different. We had a good time on the ranch together. It was a quality time. They would ask, what are you going to bring next week, mom? They had a completely different attitude towards me, and we began to heal. And I got two of my kids back, which was a shock. It was shocking that they said home of parent that day we went to court. I totally didn't expect that. And they came home unexpectedly. And my other two girls were really cutting up. They were skipping school. They were doing very poor in school. They had a bad attitude with the foster mother. And the foster mother was at her wit's end. She said, I don't want these kids anymore. They have to go. And so the social worker called me and said, I'm going to place them with the grandpa, which was actually the friend of the family at that time. And I said, why would you place them there? He's letting the kids drink alcohol and do whatever they want and skip school. And she said, well, do you want them? And this is like after hours. It was like 5:30 in the evening, and so DCFS office was closed. So she called me after hours just to notify me that she was moving my kids to a group home. And I said, of course I'll take them. So she gave me the address of the foster mother, which is unheard of. It's protected information. But they were so desperate to get rid of my girls, they sent them home. And I went to pick them up, and my daughter was flipping off the lady, and I said, hey, 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 don't do that. It's a bad reflection on us. You don't treat people like that. I don't care what's occurred here. You don't do stuff like that. And so I drove them home, and it was kind of awkward because they were used to doing whatever they wanted. And I said, here there's rules. And my daughter said, I'll just call my attorney. I said, go ahead, pack your bag and you call your attorney. You'll have to go somewhere else. And after that, after I told her that, she stayed quiet. And she's 28 today. She is one of the most respectful daughters that I have. She loves me. She adores me. I go out and see her all the time. I stay in her apartment. She calls me, to tell me little things. We're very close. She still calls me mommy at times. Like it's just a completely different world. I have another daughter that is now married, and she has three children, and her kids adore me and I love them. And she always calls me and asks me, for advice. And, our relationship is completely different, all because of one therapist that changed everything. And that's due to Dr. Swim and her team and the way she trained them. I've seen other therapists, and I tried to get out of the therapeutic setting that we were in because the therapist actually told me, oh, we could maybe walk to the store down the street and get an ice cream. Would you like that? And I said, yes, I would love that, just to get the kids out of that office. But that never occurred. And she did like maybe one or two visits and said, oh yeah, I don't think this is healthy for the children. But yet when we went to Dr. Swim's, they showed amazing progress at reunifying the family, which was the court order in the beginning, was to reunify the family. But that never occurred when going to those other places, when we had other counselors. They didn't even give it a try. They didn't give it a chance. And they made all these claims, and they labeled the kids, saying they were terrified. And then I had taken pictures. They were still allowed to go to church services because that's our family's church we went to. They would go to the services, and other people would have to transport them because we weren't allowed, me and the dad, even though he didn't do anything, we weren't allowed to transport the children. So when I was there, I said, in my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to prove that these people are lying, and these kids are not scared of me, and they're, they act way different. So I took some pictures with my son, the one that I had spanked, that brought brought us to the attention of the courts and the social workers. I took a picture with him with his arm around me, and he was smiling, and I got in trouble for it. They said, oh, you can't take pictures of the kids, and I was going to submit that to the court, to prove that this is not the way it is, the social workers claims. And so and I had a lot of things working against me, like the foster parents. Even though we had been friends, they turned against me, and they were very close to my son. They lost a son due to gang violence. No, it wasn't gang violence. It was like a bad drug deal. Their son was using drugs, and he took some drugs from a boy and said, I'm not going to give him, I'm not going to pay you, and I'm not giving him back. So they murdered him in the wash in Hacienda Heights, and he was murdered right there with two twins. Well, one of the twins survived, but I feel like they were trying to take my son away to replace their son that they lost. I don't know if that's the case, but that's how I felt. And because they were just working so aggressively against me, and saying all sorts of things. Anytime something would happen, or I would have a communication with them or with the social worker, they would make a claim that was false. And so I began to represent myself, and I got a hold of the Title 20s, and I was able to see all the phone calls going in. So I knew that the board of supervisors was, going to let her rear end. So I would call and talk to the board of supervisors and say, this is going on. So they would have to address it. So between Dr. Swim and all the board concerns and complaints, I would go to the board of supervisors. They began to change their shift the case, and eventually the kids did come back home, all of them. And the one son that they tried to keep me so aggressively from, he ended up being the thorn in their side, and they didn't want him anymore. And they said, well, will you go pick him up? At this point, he's already been to juvenile hall. He's committed crimes. I said, yes, I will get my son. And I got him. I picked him up and brought him home. We had a lot of issues going on because he wanted to do things that I told him is not permitted in the house. He couldn't go out all night and stay out. He wanted to smoke cigarettes. He wanted to do a lot of stuff. And I said, you're only a minor. You can't do this. I'm not going to let you. And so that one, he he ended up going to prison, and but he got in trouble for something that he shouldn't have done. And it was very sad because he ended up dying in prison. But before he passed away, he had changed his whole demeanor. He was a different person. He was a better person. He found the Lord, or he always knew, but he went back to his ways of, like being in church and reading the Bible and just being a completely different person. And he was writing me letters, and I wasn't sure if they were real. But after he passed away, and he died of a sepsis, and while he was incarcerated, they didn't treat him properly. He was slurring. They thought he was on drugs, but he wasn't. They did a toxicology on after death, and they didn't find anything. But he had truly changed, and that's the relief I find, that he didn't go because of suicide. He didn't go because somebody murdered him. He died of an illness, and but he died. When he died, he was not doing bad things in the prison. He was trying to straighten up his life and go to a drug program inside the prison and change his life. So, even though we hurt behind his death and we miss him tremendously, our family was restored, even with all the things that we went through with the department and with mental health services that they were trying to give my daughter and label her. We did endure all that as a family, but stayed together. And my daughters even lived with me until their 20s. They stayed with me even after they turned 18. They didn't have to live with me. They could have took off right when they turned 18. But because we had missed those years, I believe that contributed to them wanting to stay and hang around and be a family unit with all the kids in the house. We had, I think, 7 or 8 kids at that time after Andre was gone. And then I had another baby. So we didn't really have the full 9 there at one time, because either Andre was gone or my other son wasn't born yet. So if that would have been the case, if he would have lasted out of prison and I would have gave birth, we would have had the 9 kids at home, with the 2 parents. And the kids had a great time. There was never a dull moment. They were always close and laughing, and there was a lot of love in the house. And I'm forever grateful to Dr. Swim and her team. And now I see a Person Institute, for just kind of repairing things with me and the kids. We spent all that time away from each other, and Dr. Swim the girls would want to spend the night at their friend's house, and I'd say, oh, I don't know, Dr. Swim, I don't think that I don't want them to spend the night. So they'd go and tell Dr. Swim, can you just talk to my mom? I really want to spend the night at my friend's house. And I would be adamant, no, they might have weed or something there. I don't know. I just wanted to protect my kids. Then Dr. Swim would reason with me and talk to me and say, hey, maybe you should think about compromising with the girls. And so then I would relent a little bit, just a little bit.
I remember just a little bit different. What we would do is we would include the girls, and the girls would be the ones that would be like, trying to to get their case apart. But one of the things I just want to back up a little bit is that what originally happened should not have opened up a DCFS case. So it was one case of over discipline, of which a case shouldn't have been opened at that point in time. But because of who the foster parents were, they were in the they were in the they were in the legal system, right, of some type. And so um be, because because you this is a case that very much would have never been open. But because you had so many players involved, I often see this happen with many systems that it becomes like a game of telephone. So you get all these things written up that this person did that and this person did this. And pretty soon, what they've written about the clients is it's like a huge textbook, but how much of that textbook is accurate or not accurate because it's all subjective. I've had clients come in to me and say, why did you say this? When I've talked to somebody that was in social services, and I'll say, well, I don't really remember that. And they'll be like, well, this is here, right here, that you said this, that I was one of the worst mothers you've ever talked to. And I'm like, I don't think that that was me. Maybe that was somebody else. And they're like, well, then how do you get this cleared? So things get so very, I think when we're dealing with large systems, things get very complicated. And I don't think it's on purpose that they get complicated, but I think like with the number of cases and things like that. But how we always worked with, oh, hold on one second. How we have always worked with especially um cases with um just for example, like me talking about saying cases that I want to take that back and erase it. People involved with DCFS cases, because it's not cases that we're seeing, is that it's very important to, and we talked about this long ago with the collaborative practices, that who is talking to who about what's going on. So if you have the social workers involved, of course you want to be talking with the social workers to find out what their concerns are. If you have the the supervisors of the social workers, you need to be talking to them. If you have foster parents, you need to be talking about them. If you have another set of foster parents, you need to be talking to them. You talk about everybody together. So at some points in time, we would have, Margaret, you were there, but we would have almost a therapist for each one of the children and each one of the foster parents and etc. So that everybody was able to see that this was a family. This wasn't a case. It was a family. It was a family that had two parents that loved their children and had children who loved their parents but had not seen them in a long period of time. All sorts of stories were going around that, you know, um, I remember the oldest one was afraid because they had been told things about your own mental health by someone like there were just so many different um narratives going around. And so if we hadn't have been in conversation with who we were in conversation with, it would have been hard to have had the same results because people were seeing for themselves, oh, this mother and dad is fine because I'm talking to them, with a therapist at the agency, which at that point in time was the horse ranch. And Lamore, did you want to add to this? Is there something that I just saw the hand up?
Yeah, you were saying about the mother that was saying, "Oh, why did you say this to the social worker? Why did you say that?" I think you're being way too kind to think that these are mistakes of the system. These social workers straight out lie. I mean, that's my experience. They used to go into court every time with a lie. I don't know how you're being so nice about it.
Well, I think that even sometimes because there's so many cases, so many people, so many stories. And again, these social workers do have so much weight on themselves for making what they consider is very critical decisions that I don't even know if the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. Like, for example, Christina, what we're going to start having happen in California is that people that are homeless are going to start going into mental health court. So you're going to have an added layer of mental health court that's making all these decisions. And so you're going to have a lot of people from social worker to psychologist to therapist to psychiatrist to social workers. I think I already repeated that to people within the court system. And there's going to be a lot of room for a lot of room for misinterpretation. And I think that's one of the things that we help do is that we help people see people. So we help social workers see families, and we almost help families see social workers too, because a lot of times the social workers, you know, this is a face on a case, you know. It's not somebody that looks like a living and breathing person, even though the consequences of this are so dire. Just like Trina talking about the loss of her son. I remember when her son was like, I don't know, he was like, how old was he when, was he 12 or 13 when he went to that boys camp?
Yeah, yep.
And he was just a little boy. And he unfortunately wasn't able to go home, didn't receive the type of truly therapeutic services that served him. He only became more of like a quote unquote acting out teen because of the context that he was in. And he really didn't have a chance to write himself up.
Well, also they court ordered me to do therapy with him in a therapeutic setting.
Mhm.
We had 2 sessions, and
Mhm.
the therapist stopped the visits. There nothing occurred that, I mean, I know, of course I'm biased because that was my son, but nothing major occurred there. No, we didn't yell at each other. Nothing occurred for her to stop that. So
Mhm.
they never really gave us a chance to hash it out and to work things out and talk and resolve our differences. And the whole issue was I was strict on homework and school. I wanted the kids to do good. I didn't want them to, I didn't do very well in school, so I wanted to give the kids something better, like every parent does. And I was strict, and he wasn't doing his homework, and that was what the issue was. That was the issue for me, and it was a big issue. And I would have them I worked full time. I would have them in the daycare or in the after school program, and he was just not doing it. And so I told him, this needs to happen before you go and play basketball. And he just kept doing the same thing every day. And that's what the whole issue was, how that came, when I spanked him, that's what it was over. And so, and it's because I wanted I wanted him to have a good future and do well. And so, they didn't even give us the opportunity. That just didn't occur. And I think you recall one of the foster parents saying, "Oh, they're just putting my kids through school." the
That's
that
we're going up for one of those group meetings, and myself and one of our student therapists, and we were riding up the elevator, and they were talking about how much money they were making off having the children in their care. And I guess they didn't recognize we were in the elevator, and I was like, it was just so sad because um, they had a home to go to, and but nobody could see that this was a good home until the very end. And then like everybody was like seeing that this was a very good, a very appropriate home. I remember talking to the older girls and I was like, because my daughter was working in a group home at that point in time, I was like, I don't know if you guys really want to go to a group home. You know, it sounds kind of cool and all that kind of stuff, but it's not a home and it's a group, but it's kind of, I don't know, it's, like it's kind of rough, compared to where you guys have been, right now. And I remember the oldest one, saying, well, if I'm forced to go home, da 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 da. And I was like, well, okay, whatever you want, if you don't want to stay there, we'll figure it out, right? So that there's no closed door. There was no, but the first day that she came out with a suitcase full of pictures. And it just wasn't for the clinicians, because I think the team at that point in time was what, about 8 clinicians that were with me. It wasn't just for the clinicians, it was for the children. The children to see that there had been birthday parties and Easter and Christmases and everybody was happy. Because how long was it before they allowed you to have therapy with them, with us, that after they had been removed from the home?
It was, I had seen him the first year. After the year and I completed everything, I thought, oh, this is it. I'm going to get him back. They actually took the visits away and said I couldn't see him. And even though, like I said, once I got a hold of the Title 20s from county council, I was able to see all the phone calls they were making and refute that information. And even though a lot of stuff was redacted, I was still able to go around the stuff that they did put and say, oh, I talked to the mother on this day. And I said, no, that's not how it played out. I was actually with my counselor when I called and I was in my sitting with my counselor and she heard the conversation.
Mhm.
So I was able to refute a lot of things and some of the stuff that they told me, I just kind of learned from them. Whatever they told me was inappropriate, they would do that in the foster home. And I said, isn't this inappropriate? You told me that I couldn't, the one foster mother said you have to clean before you get something to eat so you can work up your appetite. So I would bring this information to either the board of supervisors or the supervisor. I would do everything in an email. And I started, seeing all the flaws and the cracks in the system, how it's good for one, but not the other. The parents can't do it, but the foster parents can. And I just said, no, this is not, it's highly inappropriate that this happens. And one lady let my daughters go around Bloomington, and I looked up Bloomington. I went on Megan's Law website, and I said, do you realize how many registered sex offenders are there? And my kids, you don't know where they're at. My daughter called me and said, Mom, can you pick me up? I said, I'm over an hour away, but I'll be there. So she had no idea where my daughter was. She just let her go. When I did get my visits back, she would send them like with a bag of chips and a soda. That was I said, did you eat? Oh, she gave us a snack. I was like, okay, no problem. We'll just go get something to eat. Just so many different things. And then my daughter swallowed a bobby pin. She was on the phone with me because the foster dad gave her a cell phone. And I called and I said, hey, she swallowed a bobby pin. She said, no, she's just saying that 'cause she doesn't want to go to school. And I said, that's not true. She wouldn't lie to me. She didn't even, I said, then can you just take her to the doctor and check? She wouldn't take her. And so I had to call the hotline and tell them I'm a parent. And then they were not sure about that because they thought I was trying to cause trouble. And I guess they told her, hey, you're going to have to at least check. And so the lady took the foster mom at that time, she took my daughter, and sure enough, she had a bobby pin in her when they x-rayed her. So, I mean, just stuff like that. They didn't want to get medical care for them. They didn't want to do a lot of things for them. And I thought, wow, they have two loving parents that are able and willing to care for them. I've done everything they've asked me to do. I've abided by everything, and they're just not, what's the problem? But, the good news is they did return home. They were very successful. My daughter graduated college. One got married. One's in the Navy. They're all good citizens, law abiding. They're not in gangs. They're not on drugs. They're perfectly fine. And I haven't. Well, actually, I have another daughter in college right now. She's changed her major a couple of times, but they're healthy adults. They're thriving well, and we have a good relationship. And I really credit Dr. Swim. I credit God for sure, but I also credit Dr. Swim for her involvement with our family and her encouragement to the girls, we always left there feeling better. Sometimes we would have, familial issues. We would have little fights, or, there would be like a little spat, like, you're not going to do this. Oh, but I want to do that. And, Dr. Swim would let me see another side of it. She would always talk to me, and I was afraid, of letting the kids go out and stuff. So she would talk to me and reason with me sometimes and say, well, think about it like this. And she would really cause me to think a little bit more about, how I was handling things, and it was very nice.
Not fight with you on that one because I think I've provided a context where you guys could all talk together. You know what I mean? Because I don't ever want to feel like I'm telling a parent what to do. But sometimes I try to represent what the child wants, right? Why the child wants it. But then it's like none of us are God, like a couple of those women were not great mothers, right? That were letting them spend the night.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant. I probably just can't articulate it as well as you, but yeah, she definitely would involve all of us. And sometimes, the girls wouldn't feel comfortable to
Yeah.
talk to me about certain things, but then when Dr. Swim would be when she was present, they would open up more, and they felt more confident to say things to me, and it worked out. It really worked out nicely.
And it was just such a beautiful endeavor because you guys would come like almost every year. You'd like be able to talk and see where everybody was at. And, the other thing is that, we were able to like really I think we were able to get like a lot of ideas of how um you know, we often talk about this, and I know that some of the people that are on right now know what I'm talking about. But a lot of times when the children have been taken away from DCFS or there is an open DCFS case, that their children thinks there's something wrong with their mom, right? Or their dad. And it's hard for them to lose that. It's a diagnosis, right? Even if it's not, even if it's not the diagnosis, sometimes it's the kids, are given a diagnosis by the social workers and told things about, from the social workers, because I think at age 12, in the state of California, the children can have all the records, so they get to see what all the therapists have written about the parents. And so how does that get deconstructed where the children and the parents can see each other for what they are, children and parents, and that whatever diagnosis or whatever every other people might have had to say about them were opinions at one point in time that may never have been valid opinions. So I don't know, Christina and Megan and you guys have been a little bit, Joanna, quiet on this. I don't know if you have some thoughts, especially on what the mothers were talking about, because it is a different type of it's a different type of humanizing that we have to do. This is within the Department of Children and Family Services, where a lot of times parents, when they get accused of some type of child endangerment, that it's very hard for them to lose that title either. Do you have thoughts on that, Christina or Megan, or both, but Christina, Megan, or Margaret, whoever would like to speak?
Um, so I noticed an ongoing theme is somewhat related to that, but the theme of defectiveness and also isolation, as Jonas had brought up earlier, this sort of um, separation that we're in, or this distance that these labels and these processes put people at in relation to us or the service providers. So hi, just to introduce myself, my name is Christina Winters. I'm living in the Netherlands. I'm American, but I grew up in the US, but I've lived in Europe for about 13 years now. And I'm working as a psychologist in private practice in the Netherlands. Um, I came across the work that Susan was doing at a conference that we met at a couple of years ago. And I really admire the work that Now I See a Person is doing, and the work in the name of anti-pathology that everyone here is focused on today. So thank you for having me here. Um, I I wanted to mention I agree with you, Susan, about what you said earlier about therapy and that we need to call it something different. So, and I still struggle with what to call people. I mean, I don't say patients, but I do say clients because I also do work that is that's outside of the realm of mental health care. So I just use client as a broad-based term to apply to whoever is working with me. But even that sounds a little bit clinical or distancing. Um, so yeah, the and therapy is it's such common vernacular that I don't even know how to advertise or promote what is needed. And I think it was mentioned earlier today is that some people aren't sure of what is needed. Um, but but anyway, with regard to what was just mentioned, and yeah, thank you to the mothers here for sharing what you all have gone through today. There's I think um outside of the realm of mental health care and social services and the legal system, there's almost an extra like a deeper layer of personal shock or offense that comes from this sort of separation that happens when one is labeled or when one's child is labeled, or you're forced to interact with these systems and then get labels or to be put into processes that you either didn't ask for or that you're not sure of the intended benefit or outcome of it. You just know that it's something that you need to do as a means to an end. And I sometimes think that some of these processes are put in place as a tick box exercise for liability or for other reasons. That's not to discredit everything. Of course, I know that we need like safety awareness and risk to balance risks in many situations, but the way that this stuff has become so standardized, it's so arbitrary and it really doesn't apply to every situation all the time. And it almost seems like when you put people through certain things, it can be so obvious to onlookers, like including people who are even intimately involved in certain cases. It can seem so obvious that wow, this is actually probably going to do more harm than help someone. And it really, from a practitioner perspective, it really sucks being in that position where it's like, oh, I have to do this, or I might get fired, or I have to do this, or I risk, um, yeah, being looked at poorly upon by my supervisor, or having some kind of disciplinary process, or something like that. When so often it's a moment to start a conversation. But usually, and unfortunately, these systems are so overburdened that even the time for that and good faith effort to discuss things like that are just kind of shut down or brushed aside. And so I think it's really important that we have days like this and meetings like this where we come together and we hear these stories. So I want to thank everyone here again for sharing.
Well, I agree with everything you said, and especially thanking you. But when I think about good practice, we're often in situations that kind of rob us of our ability sometimes to do what is good practice. So how do we participate within these systems the best that we can. And, you know, I was having a conversation, um, Megan, with you about this because, when you work in um, systems where they maybe hospitalize or they medicate, or you aren't the last word on what's happening. Because you've mentioned before you've worked in hospitals, Christina, and you work in community mental health. Is that correct, Megan? Right. And so what kind of things can you do to help maybe someone be more visible to someone else? That's really what we did with the mothers that we're talking to today, is that we helped the social workers see what we saw in the family, not necessarily um, by by any type of conflict or anything like that. It reminds me of something that Harry did early on, a long, long time ago in another land. Harry did a conference, and in his conference, he had a DCFS case, and so on the stage he had the family and himself, and then behind the curtain or the one-way mirror, or whatever it was the social workers, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, the whoever was involved with the livelihoods of the people that were in the family. And he would talk with the family in a way that others could hear how wonderful this family was. Because a lot of times what they read about, and this is what we've been talking about all day, is what is wrong, what is deficient, what maybe were some things that happened. They don't talk about really the amazing wonderfulness that each of us have at any point in time, that we aren't static. Chris talked about that as being rhizomic, you know, um, you know, of course, Jonas talked about it as humanizing and trying to take away from the person becoming that other in the relationship, as well as Ron. And I think that it's very easy to see when we're in conversation with somebody that we're able to share things like if we can share our experiences of what we have with that client. And I know that I have did that when working in hospitals or in community mental health, of talking with other people that are involved with people that I feel that are kind of my client, but they're really not my client because the money's not coming directly to me. It's not a private practice kind of a model. But people that I'm very invested that whatever type of transition or transformation can occur for them. So, I'm wondering if maybe Megan, you could talk to that about giving clinicians hope of what they can do with in difficult times when maybe the systems aren't able, for whatever reasons, to be able to see your clients or the consumers in a way that really represents them or even serves them.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Um, yeah, and I just want to start by saying what an honor it is to be here today, and how much I've really enjoyed taking in hearing everybody's voices. Um, yeah, to kind of echo what you were saying, Christina, around like, I don't know, like the sacredness of these spaces, and having kind of this time set aside for us to gather and talk about these kinds of ideas. And um, yeah, just, you know, definitely felt kind of like the overburden within systems. And so it is definitely, yeah, a really important resource, and kind of echoing, yeah, that theme of community, and how important that is to have people that you can lean on and talk to and openly with about um, yeah, stories. Um, yeah, so just really, really grateful for this space today. So I'm joining the call from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples in what is now colloquially known as Vancouver, BC. I'm a counselor, and I was originally connected with Dr. Susan Swim through Christopher Kinman, who was on the call earlier today. And again, that was so special to hear him talk about the language of gifts and rhizome and yeah, his story of Matthew and honoring the life of Matthew. Um,
I'm just going to say something very quickly. I can't
mm-hmm.
hear you very well.
Oh, okay.
That's perfect. Oh my
Is
gosh,
that
I'm
better?
such a huge difference.
Is
I
that better?
didn't say anything. I was trying to find the chat, but I couldn't. But okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, I think to that piece around, like how can we as professionals within the field like continue to hold on to that hope and also like to kind of stick on and continue on when there are all of these challenges or difficult parts of the system, how to kind of not throw in the towel and walk away from it. Like how can we work within it to make a difference. One of the things that Ron said around, like even just focusing on if we make a difference for one person, that can be, that motivation or encouragement to continue carrying on. That there are a lot of problems and are a lot of issues, and we don't need to solve all of them. However, if we can, make a difference for one person or one family, that's worthwhile, and like that's our little piece of the puzzle. And I think it definitely helps to know that there's a network of people out there all working together kind of in community to talk about these issues and to move ourselves forward. That again, getting away from that individualized lens, that it's not one of us in there alone them or anything like that. Like this is the world that we're living in, and what can we do together. How do we go forward from here? That doesn't really answer the question. It's kind of creating more questions. um, but yeah, putting, I guess, the words out there, or creating spaces where we can come together and ponder these things.
And I think, getting back to kind of Trudy, first of all, there's no sickness. I've been doing a lot of thought on this lately. And, I had sent um, the woman in the garden something last night that I was looking up. And if you look up I thought this was really, really interesting, Christina as well, and Ashley and Margaret, um, is that when you look up okay, so as Rod often says, and it's very common knowledge, the most popular psychiatric medications or psychiatric drugs are for ADHD or for bipolar disorder. And that was one of the things that alerted him, I think, when he was in his um, training as a medical doctor, that every child on this unit was either given an ADHD diagnosis or bipolar or ADHD and bipolar diagnosis. And we have to remember what these drugs are, that there's never been any documentation that these are attached to any type of biological analysis. It's all hypothetical, what anything has ever been based on. And so in such, of course, you can't have a blood test, you can't have a urine test, you can't have a saliva test, you can't have a brain scan. You can't have any of those types of biological type of tests to even show you how much medication you should be giving somebody or not, especially like an 11-year-old. an 11-year-old to be on so much medication, and then the effects of that, of being in a hospital, and most children taken into a hospital or handcuffed in a police car, it's not a sweet sight of what happens to people. I think adults sometimes can say, yeah, I'm going to go involuntarily, but for children, it's such a violent process. There's so many violent variables to the things that we're talking about. And that, you know, so when I'm looking at this, and that you see that of course what we used to call speed when I was in high school, that they started calling, Adderall, or Dexedrine or whatever, that these were drugs that were used in the 30s. In the 30s. And what were they used for? To pep people up, to make them feel a little bit less fatigued, right? Kind of like the cocaine thing of when it started in Coke. And then you fast forward it a little bit, and it's used in World War II for our soldiers, so that they can be peppy and fighting all the time and having enough energy at night to be coming out of the foxholes. And then you fast forward a little bit to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and it's used as diet pills, and, as we all know, during that period of time, if we studied women's studies, there, a lot of women were then taking a lot of Valium and things like that to go along with the stimulants because of the up and down kind of thing, causing a lot of drinking issues at that point in time, of which, they say even addiction is due to some type of a disease model. So all of these are just like, they're non-scientific paradigms that people have taken as kind of biblical truth. And it's very concerning, because even the SSRIs, that's the one that I was sharing with this mother, is that they were looking for something in the 1980s, because the antidepressants they had before then would slow people down, right? It'd make them kind of sluggish, they'd be kind of tired. And so what they found was something to mix with that, right? To make them up and sedate them at the same time. So you have wide awake people that are being sedated. And so none of this is helping you feel better as a person. None of this is like it's going to alleviate depression or anxiety or quote unquote eating disorders or OCD or what 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 harms you. And so a lot of people become unscathed with that, but when they really have issues where they're having so many symptoms, that not only does that not work, but the increase in that creates, what is it called, Joanna, that it increases? That aggression? Are you there? So I'm not sure if Joanna is able to answer at this point in time, but I think it's called akathisia. And it's like this internal response where you have like Kim talks about this well, about what happened to her husband after he was on, was it Zoloft for 6 weeks and then took his life? Like the restlessness and the blunting and the pull at suicidal ideation or violent types of thoughts. See, so if you have the medications that are producing these violent thoughts, and we're giving it to people, but then we're defining it that it's part of the disease model that they have, what in the world are we participating in? Because there were people here previously that had to leave that wanted to talk about that. They wanted to talk about, what is it like at 15 to be put on this medication? What is it like at 13 to be put on this medication? And then how did that serve them growing up that way? Was it able to keep them out of hospitals? Was it able to keep them in kind of a realm where they were thriving in life, or were they surviving in life? And that's what we're finding out, is that a lot of people that this happened to, that they move into their 20s and 30s, that they're surviving, they weren't thriving. And you top that off with that now, one of the things that Jessica wanted to talk about was, I'm just like pulling some of these notes. is that um, she said, because she was talking about the MAID Act, and she said in 2024 there were 16,499 medical assistance in dying provisions in Canada. This figure represents all cases where the procedures were carried out, which accounts for the final approvals that resulted in an assisted death. The total requests were almost 23,000 reports. It said of those requests, almost 17,000 people received the MAID. The remaining cases did not result in the provision for various reasons. She said that one of the things that they were trying to do underground in Canada was to help people through different type of venues. One of the things that they talked about was the psilocybin approvals, that they were able to get 104 requests for psilocybin approvals. And so 104 people did not proceed with the MAID. And I heard last night, I think it it might have been Laura Delano and Dr. Joseph, I can't remember his last name. He runs the tapering clinic that tapers people off of the psychiatric medication. But they allowed these people to have a chance that were running the psilocybin clinics. And I guess what the idea of that is that they take some psilocybin and then they can kind of be in a state of mind where they're maybe rethinking things, or I'm not quite sure why they let that type of treatment have a chance and not the other type of treatments. But that was 104 people, Megan. Out of what? 104 people out of almost 17,000 that received, and almost 23,000 requests. The same thing is happening here in the United States. We're doing this CARE Act in California. And so that anybody that is homeless is also diagnosed as a mental illness. And so because most people believe that people with any type of symptoms, whether again, if these are psychotic symptoms or symptoms of bipolar disorder or whatever they want to name it, that these are static labels and static symptoms that they're going to have for life, and they're going to be medicating people on these medications. That's one of the things that is going towards mental health court. So people, whereas some of the people in here that have talked, they were able to get off the medications. What if the mental health court stops people from getting off the medications? Like what if parents aren't able to talk to a psychiatrist and say, my son's not really, or daughter's not doing really well on the medications. They were kind of got worse after we started it. Would you give them a chance to get them off of it when that now becomes not the kind of cultural norm within our field? That's kind of my fear. Because we have a little bit more wiggle room, it seems like, right now.
I was kind of thinking like for youth and children, like they have a lot of them are blessed with parents to advocate for them, whereas folks who kind of move into, like the adult mental health system, they may not necessarily have those same connections or people that are advocating for them. And so if their functioning has kind of deteriorated, and especially, taking into account long-term effects of being on psychiatric medications that perhaps they started younger, um, that yeah, just that kind of like entrapment within, um, yeah, where they're at, is going to be even more profound than what we're seeing with children and youth. I guess that's another piece that keeps me going within the children and youth sector, is that, we are getting to connect with them a little bit earlier in life. And, not to say that there isn't hope or there isn't that same opportunity for adults. However, just within, I guess, yeah, current, um, things can get more complicated or more kind of complex or deep rooted, um, in adulthood.
So it made me think yesterday about one of the things that Laura Delano was saying on this interview with Dr. Yosef. And, and one of the questions that came in, because they were doing a live broadcast, which I would like to do that too soon. Wouldn't you, Christina? Anyways, you guys would all want to do it with us that's on here too, I'm sure, including the woman in the garden, but and the one with her hand raised up. But one of the things one of the things somebody was saying to her, because they knew that I don't know Laura's story for real, but what I think it is, what I've heard and read a little bit about, is that like when she was 13, she started cutting on herself and then wanting to kill herself. And her parents, I think her parents, like pretty affluent. And so then, they believed in therapy and things like this. And so they took her to a therapist. But then a therapist put her on SSRIs and then put her in the hospital because she wasn't getting better on the SSRIs. So in our mind, that's very normal, right? That a person doesn't get better on SSRIs, right? Because it's not a chemical fix, it's another level of drug you're putting somebody on when they're in an acute case of crisis. So what if you become more paranoid or more like just like confused? A high level of being overwhelmed and confusion is what these drugs are people with lived experiences describe these drugs as. And so you're taking on the little child on that and they get worse. Well, then they're going to start going into the hospital. And that's what happened to her. And she spent most of her professional life, she said she spent most of her adult life as a professional patient until one day, kind of like Trudy's story, she's like, what the heck is going on with me? Everybody, I think I was talking with Jessica about this. Everybody has their own story of they're like, I don't know if this is real. Like one of Jessica's colleagues, I was talking with her about that. And I don't know how it was that she realized that she was an alcoholic because she was in an AA and kind of high up in that and was doing some type of work with AA. And then eventually started rethinking the whole concept of how can I have no self-agency? How can I have a disease that I'm tied to? And then during COVID, she found herself having some symptoms of, I think it was anxiety or depression. And what person that did not have those symptoms during COVID, right? Especially people that were single. Who are you living with to be able to go over to their house and stuff and, trust them to breathe on you or whatever. And so she said that she was writing this down. And on one side of the paper, she had like what AA had taught her and that she had learned that it was what she called human trafficking was AA. And then she was like, they're trying to do the same thing to me, but with a mental health thing. And so, people being told that there is something wrong with them, that the way to get better is through a clinician or a medication, and then that is not indeed working, but making them worse. And so if you are, so when the woman said, so what should I do with my daughter? That she's cutting herself and stuff like that. She said, don't become overwhelmed. Don't become afraid of your daughter. These are things that you can handle within the family, that you don't necessarily have to take somebody to a therapist. How do you talk with your daughter or your son or whoever that might be and say, sweetheart, what's going on with you? And how can I help? And how can we make life better for you? Like we used to before we farmed people out to professionals. And even if there's not, even if the parents might not be capable of that, maybe they're fighting or something, there's an aunt, there's an uncle, there's a grandparent. That's what she was saying. There's other people to go to. But to seek psychiatric services and to seek therapy at this point in time, all arrows point to the same thing. The ability to get well, the ability to transform is not high. And so, like your wonderful work, Megan, needs to be talked more about. Your wonderful work, Christina, you know, um, the work that we've been able to do. And thank you everyone so much for giving us so many compliments on this, but I always feel that our work is a complete partnership. It's not us. Like I wish we were that cool and clever and all that kind of stuff, but I think we're just a bunch of people who care about people and we want to help from the bottom of our hearts, and it's a heart thing. And for some reason, you know, some of us were lucky to have met maybe mentors, but some of us just kind of figured it out for ourselves that this wasn't quite right. But I love what you say about the children. How do we get the children support? I think that's wonderful because if you get them support in the schools with the school psychologist, what's going to happen? It's going to be that narrowing, right? Narrowing, 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 narrowing. Like the other people that don't see you, Megan, it's like the narrowing, the narrowing, narrowing, narrowing. Or, but what happens to those adults that have nobody? Where people have said, you know, well, since you were in seventh grade, you had to be on Adderall, and then at 10, you had to be on SSRIs, and, you know, now you're on drugs, and, you know, of course we're going to put you back in the hospital. What does every good parent say? Let's go to the ER, as one of the mothers was texting me today. So I'm going to ask you, if you're still able to listen, the wonderful woman in the garden, what 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 are your thoughts on this for to help raise awareness that that there's real hope for people?
Well, I think having these conversations as a group and understanding that there's like-minded individual that think that the system doesn't work well and is damaging. I think talking about it is so important. So many, it's sort of a counter conversation. I think nowadays there's so many people who are untrained, making income on social media and promoting sometimes really static ways and diagnostic ways of seeing the other, the trend of the narcissist, the trend of the toxic spouse, the trends of ADHD approach to parenting or oppositional defiant disorder. These are all things I see on my feed alone. I now know how to add blocked words to my social media feed, so I'm not constantly exposed to that. But I think having these conversations is really important. For me, it's speaking and sharing when I'm with my parent peers who are struggling. Um, what a disservice entering therapy was, and how now I really see the path to any kind of healing having to do with being seen, being loved, being shown understanding. Things those are the really healing modalities that we've gotten away from with the insurance and medical system. So yeah, changing the word of therapy to maybe, you know, accessing wisdom or a sort of mentoring, life mentoring skills.
Because, one of the things is that, they talk about the peer mentoring or peer whatever it's called, but it's people talking more about the deficiency models, right? So I'm a peer helper, but I want to ask you to stay on the medication and, go to therapy and your life is going to be okay.
Yeah, what I meant for me, peer to peer means in informal conversations with moms and parents.
Yes, I agree with you completely. But I was just kind of tagging off of that and saying that there's this thing, within DMH is about peer consulting or peer being together. And the problem is that those peers are not are doing more of the narrowing. Does that make sense? Well, listen to your doctor and they'll have those words of wisdom of stay on your medication. And because what do you think would have happened if your son would have stayed on his medication?
He would have never had the opportunity to develop who he's meant to be. He would have been disconnected from the family maybe forever because he would have suffered without a motherly hug, a fatherly loving glance at a time when he was most scared. He was starting to develop facial tardive dyskinesia that could have impacted him for life. And I don't know how my heart as a woman and as a mom would have ridden along all that. We're also in a situation in California where these medical and behavioral challenges led us as well to a DCSF case where we were then all forced into therapy. I was informed by a very wise person that DCSF transacts in therapy as though it's a currency. But when the currency is poison, are they really healing the families or just, protecting themselves from liabilities? And there was another point that made it really difficult to navigate. In California, we have something called AMA. It's an acronym for Against Medical Advice. And if a therapist, whether with a master's degree or an intern or a doctorate degree, mentions a recommendation for therapy, which they had for my son, they wanted him to go to a closed facility with high perimeter fences. There was a law and a note in our file that's saying that mother was going AMA, that meant against medical advice, because I did not want to send him to that high perimeter facility where I would have not been able to love him and show him care and continue the mothering and parenting he needed so much. I'm emotional now because his life was saved. It was saved through demedicalizing him and our family with doctors, with psychiatrists, with medication, with diagnosis, with school reports. It was giving ourselves a fresh new start without any of that. Mm-hmm. And in the end, that's what we really needed.
And I think that's something central to everything that everybody's talked here, because if you look at what, Trudy talks about that in she has two podcasts that she did with us that are on our YouTube station, but she went AMA that day that she said that she left and then she decided to say no to the medication and taper herself off of it. Unbeknownst to me, she didn't go back to the medication. I didn't know that until today, that she didn't go back to the medication, but she started believing it again. And then I think she read the book from Laura And she was like, uh-huh. My head got, because it's so hard to believe in all of this, because you're told constantly, 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 constantly on the advertising, especially here in the United States. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. When anything ever happens to anybody, it's like, no, we need to put them in for medication in the hospital and get, what's it called? Like not get, like get them stabilized, right? So it sounds real, you know? So, so Megan, do you have anything more to add about that? About like if you had advice, like Laura had advice, maybe
Oh,
be
can I just finish? If I have any advice to share is don't go see a therapist
yes.
because you don't know what that sharing will trigger in the form of official government responses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just
I
gonna
want
ask,
to counterbalance that with, but do put love, put time, put attention, put softness of heart and judgment into every situation, because I'm sure that helps a whole heck of a lot more.
well, one of the things, Carolyn, that I always say that I've seen through doing this for 44 years is that it's the love of the family that heals. That somebody especially when it comes to the children, that somebody in the family or somebody reached out and helped with love, not deficiency language, just pure love. And the other thing Laura said in her book, I haven't read the book, but I just listened to the podcast, so much easier for me, is that is that people need meaning in life. So a lot of times when we'll see children and they've had such difficult times, we'll be like, hmm. So when they get out of the hospital, what kind of fun things can you do, right? That are group things, not just like isolating things, like changing schools, and it's that most amazing school, and being with friends and riding dirt bikes or ice skating or do all of these wonderful things that give us meaning in life. And then for adults, it's us finding meaning in life again. So Ashley, is there anything that you want to add since we only have a few minutes and your
Um,
voice is so profound?
oh, thank
Oh,
you.
oh, oh,
Um, so I just wanted to take a moment and thank everyone again for coming. Thank you so much for bringing your time and care to this topic. I know it's something that we as society should not turn a blind eye to. We should have these open conversations of how do we move forward in a world that pushes people not to feel, and how do we rebel against that by allowing safe spaces to express and to feel and to be human and see the miraculous wonders that can occur from that. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for donating, for the friends that took the time to give the donation for us. It's how we run the nonprofit. And thank you so much for everyone who took the time to share their stories. Your voices matter, and yeah, your impact on this planet, and being brave enough to again express that rebellion against, it's not exactly a rebellion, it's an honest holding a mirror to what happens when people rob the care from a system that needs a lot of care, such as emotions. Thank you.
you're right. There's no rebellion if there's nothing to rebel against. Does that make sense? It's like,
Mhm.
how do we offer alternative meanings that maybe are a little bit more accurate than someone is having a chemical imbalance. I've been bullied at school. Things are about going bad at home. I tell my school counselor that I want to kill myself. I go into the hospital and they say, you have a chemical imbalance and you're going to be like that. And it's just like diabetes and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And then they go on the medication and you start getting overwhelmed and, um, and, and that, if that's a story, that should be the end of the story. Then everybody needs to know that they get out of the hospitals and they say, we're okay. They find clinicians to be able to taper them off the medication and, um, maybe recovery coaches to talk to, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone here has experienced really challenging aspects of life, and the current system doesn't accept or normalize that. Like, I was a difficult teenager who was told that I would never be okay because
Be
I
okay.
was sleeping too much, like, but that doesn't define me in my life. There's so much that goes past and what the system tells you and what these doctors tell you, and it's just one opinion and a whole ocean of people. Like, there's still meaning for everyone, and it doesn't matter if, we're all a little kooky, we're all a little weird sometimes, and that's okay, and we can make it through whatever sets us gives us that strangeness or sets us in a strange emotional landscape.
What a world that would be, right? If we lived in a world where we could make decisions and people wouldn't look at you like there was something perhaps deficient in you or something like that. Be like, oh, wow, like it used to be like, oh, that's a good idea. But now, especially what you were talking about your generation, that there's always something suspect. Like, oh, well, why are you doing that? Like, is there something
Mhm.
that you're not coping with, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is a very normal conversation with people that aren't even in the field of psychology. Like, they're in the field of the arts or philosophy or literature or linguistics, and they're talking about, oh, I'm a bit distracted today and I think I have ADHD, or oh, I don't know if I'm processing this breakup correctly because I'm still crying about it every day. And it's kind of like in it's such a popular narrative, the DSM-5 right now. It's very, very popular for people to discuss this as if it was like the weather changing. And to me, that feels so strange and so wrong. And like within those same tables, sometimes I'm like, oh man, like, can we just like, what happened to blaming the moon? Like, what happened to saying I'm on my period? Like, what happened to saying I'm just going through like a weird patch right now? Or like, why does it have to be attached to something so heavy? Like, why does this have to define our whole existence? Or why is it that it it can't be simple?
and
Like,
why would you need therapy? Why do you need therapy? Like, don't understand. Like,
yeah.
like, yeah. Anyways, we will talk more about this because first of all, I don't know if Joanna talked about this about our learning programs, but if anybody wants to learn about our certificate programs, they're on nowiseeaperson.com. All the information about it can either be like a cafeteria where you take certain classes or you take a 2-year program with different prices. The other thing is that we're going to be starting, Christina, you want to talk about what we're going to be starting and we'll have that on here and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, so Dr. Swim and Ashley, Jonas, and a few others are interested in working together on a podcast. And so we would like to make a series of things such as this, but shorter content in general, just it's more accessible and digestible to people, to get stories out there. And I'm personally interested in somewhat even shorter content of practitioner stories because oftentimes due to various legal issues and um, confidentiality agreements and what have you, like practitioners oftentimes can't talk about what goes on outside of the context of their job. But I would like to open a platform for anonymous stories that practitioners might like to share about what they have seen in the field, what they have encountered, and what they maybe have been had ethical quandaries within themselves about doing, or just these unique perspectives that we don't so often see. I think there's social media these days is sort of it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and just what was just said a moment ago about the what Ash was saying about how why everything has become uh, much more complex and like, oh, it has to be much greater than it is. I feel like nowadays with social media, it's almost like people have this pressure to explain and this pressure to perform. But on the other side of that, it would be nice to elevate some of these stories in an effort for getting word out about how how these what needs to change and what's been kept in the dark so long. As I can imagine that it's very difficult, and I mean, in my own experience as well, it's been very difficult for me to talk about or share my experiences, not as as a practitioner, but as a service user, and having a supportive community, having platforms where people are encouraging you to share. I think that that's all the more supportive, and in the name of promoting this, I think it would be a great way to build a conversation further around this.
Absolutely. So one of the things I want to show is that Kim just came and joined us, which we're so happy. We were almost ready to wrap up, and I looked up and I went, "Oh my gosh, Kim's here!" I'm so happy you're here. A lot of people have left by now, but I am happy you're here. And
Um,
hello, how are you?
hello. I'm great. How are you? I'm really sorry, but these two things like kind of conflicted. So I'm glad I was able to at least get here and be a part of it because I'm a huge supporter. I was just actually telling some people that somebody that was just talking even about her mother's lived experience with schizophrenia, and she had no idea of my work, and I said, oh, I'm supposed to be going on this conference call, and I love what they do, which is see the whole person, like, and see that. And so I think it's really really important, and I'm a huge fan of your work because I think, as you know, for anybody who doesn't know, and I can quickly go into my how I got involved or what I'm doing, but I do think, I'm just really grateful. I love the work you do, and that's why try to do whatever I could to be here. So thanks, Susan.
So would you like to just to talk a little bit about your work? Because I think your work is so life-saving. I've shared this with so many people, Kim, and I tell you each time I do, it is so profound. So
Oh,
I want to share was so welcome.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, first of all, I was just listening at the last speaker, and I love what you said about like just this idea of sharing stories, because I really think stories and lived experiences, whether it's from the practitioner point of view or the patient perspective or a family member, I think is really, really important. And so how I got involved in this, which I like to call myself an accidental advocate because I am doing work that I would never have chosen, but I realized that it actually does. That's why I think I saw Ash on the call, and I talked. Oh, I have a dog that's here because we're at somebody's house at this retreat. Anyways. I love the idea of like I believe that everybody comes into this world as self-expressive. When you come in, no matter what happens and life happens and whatnot, we're all self-expressive beings. And I think, the system kind of keeps us playing, like keeps people wanting to be small, so for control and whatnot. But here's how I got involved 22 years ago, or gosh, it's going to be 22 and a half years. My husband, I was married for about 10 years, and my husband just started his dream job with a startup company, having trouble sleeping. And he was given an antidepressant. He went to his doctor, his GP, given an antidepressant, Zoloft, told him it would take the edge off and help him sleep. I happened to be out of the country the first 3 weeks he was on the drug. Then when I got home, what he's telling me, his head's outside his body. We, calmed him down, told him to breathe, and called the doctor. The doctor said, you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. Woody lasted another week. His life, he's telling me his head's outside his, the whole thing. He was found dead hanging at age 37. The night that he was found on August 6, 2003, the coroner asked one simple question: was he on any medication? The only medication he was taking was Zoloft. And also the front page of our newspaper that same day had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide. So that really, because Woody left no note, Woody had no history of depression, that really, my brother-in-law, because my whole life had just fallen apart. My sister's husband went home and Googled Zoloft and suicide. We had no idea the history of the SSRIs, that the FDA in 1991 had a advisory committee looking at the emergence of violence, and I always say violence, and suicide with Prozac. And every one of the members on the committee that took money from manufacturers making the antidepressants said, nope, we don't see anything. So fast forward, that was 91. Fast forward, now you have Zoloft on the market, Paxil on the market, and for kids. So that's really at the point where I came in, and it became our mission to get black box suicide warnings added to antidepressants. It was 2004 for kids, 2006 for adults. The reality is all ages are at risk. And then I also had a wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit against Pfizer, where we got a bunch of documents out from under seal that I used in the words, because you know what, sometimes they kept, even when we went to the FDA, they're saying, oh, this is just an anecdotal story. And I'm like, a bunch of anecdotes, which is real world, right, are data points. And but the documents so it was no longer my story, because the documents that are drug company documents, FDA documents, they've known the risks, including withdrawal and helping people get off the meds, and the violence aspect. And so I think, so we eventually, the lawsuit, I testified before Senate, and I realized, wait, it's not even the system of, it's how drugs come on market. And then my background's advertising. So I started to see how all the dots and every part of the system is influenced by pharma's money. And so everybody's got a piece of skin in, financial skin in this, creating this narrative that drugs are safe and effective. And so the interesting thing coming full circle is that committee that in 1991, Woody and all the countless families that I met had no voice that represented them. I spent 9 years, 3 consecutive terms on that same committee, being the voice of the public. And so I see how drugs come to the market. And I always say, healthcare, it's a big business. And you have to remember, they're always going to put the best data forward to get it approved. And the system is really, really about selling benefits and not the safety. So anyways, that's mine. But, interesting, I'm really concerned now, or the things I'm working on are violence, the aspect of violence piece. Also, this idea of wanting to work other ways. I mean, I'm so tired of people being told that they're broken and labels, because they're not broken. We all have stuff. I'm with, people that have had major traumas, but like trauma and shadow work is actually the way in to transmuting pain and stuff. So anyways, I have a lot of things I'm passionate about, but mostly I'm passionate about like making sure that no family has to learn the hard way after the fact. So that's a little bit about me. I threw a lot of stuff there. And I would be more than happy if people have any, questions or comments or anything, or just want to ask an opinion about something. I would love to be a part of it.
Well, one of the things we were talking about previously is that, I'm an old timer, so I was around before the SSRIs, and I was when psychiatrists really did kind of do what maybe they were intended to do, which was like hold somebody's hand, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry you're going through this. And if they were going to put them on anything, it was like the antidepressants then that would make people a little bit loopy and blunted, but they took you off of it. They didn't let you get, number one, addicted to it. Number two, you knew going on it was going to be very short term. You knew in your mind you didn't need them, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It's like having surgery, have a little bit of anesthesia, and then you were going to be able to be okay. And then what happened when this came on is that they said it was a chemical imbalance, and it ignored completely the context of people. So the reason why people, like maybe they weren't sleeping, or the reason why, let's just say somebody was getting a divorce or somebody had an affair, all of those things didn't matter. They started putting them on, I use it loosely, this medication, and they knew the medication, they knew what it did. And you know that too.
Yep.
Really knew there was no chemical imbalance. What they were doing is they were searching for something that would make people a little bit more wide awake than just loopy when they got the SSRIs. You read that, right? That they
Yep.
something like that. Like they invented this kind of Frankenstein medication and then sold it that it was going to take away all the ills that they were feeling.
Yeah, and that whole chemical imbalance, in one book that I would highly recommend if people haven't, The Myth of the Chemical Imbalance by Joanna Moncrief, psychiatrist. I was just at a conference this December where she spoke at the Inner Compass. And the Inner Compass is really interesting. That organization, and I told them about yours, is that it's really about all these lived experiences are coming forward because we've been told and sold a lie like to chemical imbalance, but and I remember even after like Woody died, the doctor asked if I wanted something. And I'm like, what? I go, well, first of all, I think it's the drug that killed him. I go, but aren't I supposed to hurt? Like I was literally going, what? Like it just didn't intuitively. She goes, I go, my husband died. Aren't I supposed to hurt? And she goes, well, you don't need to. And I thought, yeah, I do. And so like, I think there's idea of the being sold this chemical imbalance and that's why I love, knowing that a lot of that was marketing and the data that has really come out has shown something different. But this idea that they have said you have to be on it for life or people think they have to be on it life or it's really the difficulty of coming off the medication, but then they're told that it's their disease. And so they can't. So people are on them for decades, but I always say, like, is our mental health care system, has it improved with the advent? It seems like we've declined because we're kind of forgetting that some of these are just life experiences, like you said, divorce or, a death or a breakup or job loss. I mean, these are short-term kind of experiences, but we're medicating it like it's a disease.
And then because of the medication, Kim, it blunts them. They
Yeah.
don't find solutions to their problems. They start losing everybody, friends, co-workers, jobs, etc. And then they do want to take their lives.
Yep, exactly. Because that's a really good point, that numbing and blunting. And then obviously the PSSD has been a huge part that, in other countries they're talking about it, but the US, I know there's organizations that are trying to get if you start feeling nothing and blunting and emotional, yeah, it is impacting the quality of your life, that the original problem that you went on the drug doesn't even, you're like, oh, I would rather take that than all of this. And then you don't want to engage with people. You don't want to all of that. So anyways, it's an issue.
And so what you have written on recently was the web of sickness. Is that right? Or what is that?
Oh, yeah. I do a lot of speaking to med schools, but also to the general public. And it's the selling sickness, big pharma's spider web of influence. And I really put the doctor and you could probably if people haven't read it, I did a big Substack post on it, but really putting the doctor and the patient in the middle of the spider web. And it's everything that's trapped them. I mean, things that are business things like how patents, but the regulatory agencies, the advertising, the samples, the ghostwriting, the key opinion leaders, all the organizations that we actually think are supposed to be working on our behalf. Like, people, I think the general public, anytime I see like somebody who's going to donate their money to National Alliance for Mentally Ill, I'm like, oh, I wonder if, and because they lost somebody, I'm like, I wonder if they know that a lot of these organizations, like when there's new drugs coming to market, the first thing they basically have become, because the funding, and I always say, get to know where funding comes from. A lot of times they're advocating for more treatments. We need more, as opposed to, are they really advocating for the patient? And so I think it's this idea of I want people, and even our doctors, I want them to like learn critical thinking or be curious or ask questions like, is this a ghostwritten article? Is like, oh, I heard this because this doctor at some big medical conference that has paid for me and it's talking about the latest treatment. Is it the latest treatment, or are they getting funds and they become a talking piece? Because what happens is that influence then impacts the influence of other doctors, and that becomes a practice. And so I think the more information we have, it makes us not only our doctors better, but it also makes our patients and family members to ask better questions.
Absolutely. So, I don't know if any of I think we still, one of the mothers that we have here, it was her son that tried to take his life by
I'm sorry.
himself when he was 11.
Wow.
You want to describe that just very quickly to Kim?
Hi, Kim. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm really sorry, but how's your son doing?
He's alive, 14, demedicalized, has no diagnosis, no IEP, and he's dirt biking right now. But his first suicide attempt came 2 weeks after he was put on Lexapro, and then started a series of what I call the big teen industry or troubled teen industry, the big teen industry, where there's a series of treatments that are proposed that start with a psychiatric hospitalization, then residential care, then there's weaning down to 5-day-a-week care, and then to 3-day-a-week care, and then they can reintegrate school. We went through that loop both times within 2 weeks of a change of medication. And by the second attempt, there were probably 4 different layers of medication. Stimulants had been switched 5 times because of shortages in supplies during COVID. And being a mom who's parenting a child who's suicidal and self-harm became really, really difficult. I want to talk about it because in passing, the doctors and prescribers would say, oh, by the way, a bit like they do on the radio, can increase suicidal ideation, and they talk really quickly, and it's wrapped in a big sort of information package. And it dawned on me that if somebody's suicidal, why are we giving them a medication that might make them more suicidal? And why are we doing it to children? My son was in a medical prison that I created and supported, where he had to take the medication because it's what the doctors said. He had no choice to not take. He could have, but he also assumed that we were looking out for him and we knew what we were doing. And we thought pharma knew what they were doing and the doctors knew what they were doing. And I'd love to hear more about the aggression part, because one of the his hospitalization came after a change in medication with Abilify, and he became really, really violent, harming me, and I was hospitalized. So our family has had, through his experience, the roller coaster of increases in severity of symptoms.
I was going to say, first of all, I want to just say thank you for sharing your story. I also believe that as a mother, your story is super powerful, not only just as the lived experience, because you had to live, you're part of the lived experience too, right? And what your family saw and experienced. But it's interesting. You said something that you're like, you trusted, everybody trusted, right? And that's where I think I'm always like, I want to go upstream so parents don't. But the aggression is absolutely part of these medications, from the antidepressants, the antipsychotic, and especially if they're not needed. And I agree, when you have, it always like intuitively never made sense way back when we were trying to get the warnings, that why would you, like, help me understand why wouldn't put a warning on when you're giving it to people who are already depressed. Like, if you're saying it's the patient or the person, why are you giving them a medication that can make them this? Like, absolutely, don't downplay it. That should be the most important part. And the parents should know this. Like, it doesn't
how are
even
we
make
going to
sense.
differentiate if he is feeling more suicidal and the doctors are saying, hold on 2 weeks at least before it kicks in?
Yes.
How do you differentiate that it's a bad reaction to the medication as opposed to just which is probably what it was, but if you're looking at it from a therapist side, as opposed to just him being more depressed,
Yeah.
And the children don't have words to say, hey, don't have the same amount of words and subtleties to express what they're feeling.
Absolutely. This is why it's super important. Like, we have a real conversations with parents, right? So that we can actually tell them what to look for. Like, if all send it to your kid, well, first of all, I'm not even sure. There's all these things now that you can give a test. I didn't know that there's tests that you can give to see how a medication may or may not work for somebody. The PY 450, some tests. I'm like, I don't even understand. I'm like, if somebody's going to go on these drugs, why aren't we even testing to see how their body even, can process a medication? Yeah. And so I don't understand that, but I agree. I think, I don't understand why you wouldn't give somebody the example of a behavior, so that if you see the behavior, right, you have something that you can actually use.
But yeah, in our case, right, it was all mixed into one big ball of behaviors. I knew something was wrong, and both times all 3 times I ended up reaching out to the provider ahead of the attempts and the attack, saying, hey, something's wrong, what do I do? And by the time the provider would reach back out, they would say, you have to stay at least 2 weeks on it. And both suicide attempts and the attack happened within 2 to 3 weeks of the new medication. And anytime you want to tap into my experience or give my information to another parent, I'm happy to speak to anyone.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I would love to have your contact info. And I know Susan will probably, she'll connect us. Because I think also, I'm just going to say one more thing that I've seen. I say this all the time to doctors. So I go, we don't ever like underestimate the mother's intuition or a caregiver's intuition. Like if something is like in you is like, there is no way this is my son, this is my kid, mama knows best.
Yep.
And when we go against our intuition is when we get in trouble. And we also give our authority and our power and our questions, like we're giving somebody outside. And I say that no matter what, no one's going to care more about you or your loved ones. They're not the ones than you will. And they're not the ones that are going to live with the harms. You are. Like, so they might say, stay on it for 2 more weeks, but everything in you is like, no, this doesn't, like my kid is, something's not right. And so push and not be afraid to push back and go against your intuition, because you have an intuition that you know your kid way more than that provider or doctor does. But also, why can't we have this conversation? Like, I don't know. I mean, for the providers, I don't understand why we don't listen more to somebody that comes to us and says, this isn't making sense. Like, why are we just also trusting the data, or like, it's what the data says, but if the data is flawed initially, we're all trusting things that aren't accurate. And so you're arguing against mama's best, mama knows best, as I always say. So anyways, I really, really appreciate it.
The provider does not know the client. The provider does not know the mother. And you don't
Yeah.
know they're suspect because you think if there's something wrong with the kid, then there really has to be something wrong with the mom, or else the kid would be okay. So you're coming from all of these different directions. You're giving a medication that doesn't solve a chemical imbalance. What it does is that it makes you imbalanced and makes people confused,
Yes.
makes people blunted. We're doing this to small children. What I saw so much with small children is that you put them on these medications and they start cutting themselves. They start jumping out of windows. They start drinking things they're not supposed to drink because they want to kill themselves. And when you ask them about it, they don't really want to kill themselves. They're just feeling so terrible.
They want the thing to stop, whatever. And that's exactly like one of the things that I learned with through litigation. There was a document called, the akathisia is the side effect, right? But Pfizer chief medical officer wrote about it, that if a patient gets it, and then we're talking adults, we're not talking kids, we're at least adults. I mean, kids probably don't know what's going on, or they have the words, as she had said, but felt like their heads heads outside their body, but quote unquote, less that it is a side of the disease, it's a side effect of the drug, and quote unquote, death can be a welcome result. And so, but what they didn't tell people is that same chief medical officer sent a memo to all the sales staff and said, thank you, said that article was not suitable for general practitioners, but only neurobiologically inclined psychiatrists. So they also intentionally kept, because they know the GPs, the pediatricians, the nurse practitioners, like that's where a lot of these drugs are being written, and that's where the business is. And so, I keep saying no one's ever going to care more about you or your loved one. Do your research, not be afraid to challenge. I know just, I have not been in that situation where you are, where you're trying to fight with and I've heard school systems that are saying you have to keep your kid on it. I'm like, who, like, why are they thinking they're our boss? But I remember I had some procedure done that had it was like an endoscope that they were putting down. And the guy that was getting ready, I was asking him a zillion questions. And the doctor said, he looked at me and he goes, do you know how many of these I do every single week? And I was like, oh my God. He was like, and I go, do you know how many I've, and first I go, first of all, I'm not questioning whether you're good at your job. I've never had any of those. That's never going, you're putting that in my body. I have the right. And maybe I'm afraid. Like, have you thought of that? And I questioned him and pushed back, but I was like, because I learned the hard way of not questioning, never even asking the question, not even being curious about the medications that my husband took at the time, but even my parents now, like I'm always trying to ask them to ask questions because, again, they don't live with the harms you do.
And Kim, when I was doing some research for today, um, and I can cite it at some point in time, but what it said is that half of people in the United States are on mind-altering drugs. So whether it's the SSRIs or the antipsychotics or the ones for anxiety, it's also the ones that they're using on the elderly for neuropathy, gabapentin, all of these different that were psych drugs that they're refurbishing in different ways.
Yep, absolutely.
A huge amount. Christine, what time is it there? Late? It's late.
Well, she has.
It's 11:36 at night.
Oh, are you in Europe?
Yeah, I'm in the
Oh,
Netherlands.
oh, nice. And I'm going to say our break, I see people are coming back to go back from our lunch. We had it's the second day. So I probably need to wrap up, but I'm so glad. I wish I could have been earlier because I love the work you guys do. And I've met some of you other people too. So
email me and we will talk before you leave.
Okay, perfect. And maybe we can actually get together when I'm out here. So good to see you guys. Thanks, Carolyn, for sharing. Ash, always good to see you.
Good seeing you
Huge,
too.
huge fan. I'm a huge fan of yours. So I love the work you do.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan, for having me.
Thank you for coming. Talk soon. Okay, guys. So what a delight this was. It was a delight for everyone to come. And I'm glad that we didn't wrap up. We were just about to wrap up and we didn't. I think it's wonderful whenever we can have, like Kim's voice, where she did sit on the FDA board for 3 consecutive terms. Like that's a long period of time. So anyways, thank you all so much for everything. It was a pleasure and we'll see each other soon, right? Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank
I'm gonna turn it off then, everybody, if that's okay.
you.
Bye-bye. Take care. Here we go. And actually call me this week.
Okay, I can call you.